workshops, and I normally do things in front of crowds with people. It's a huge part of my mission. So I'm fully embracing the online world, and I'm really excited about this. A little thing that I'd really love to start with, it's going to get dangerously woo-woo, but we will talk a lot more about building and all that stuff. The inventor of SuperAdobe, Nader Khalili, who I'll go into his story in more detail later, believed and imbibed all of his work with the spirit of Rumi, who's a 16th century mystic Sufi poet. And I'd absolutely love to read a small translation of his. It's a deeply emotional thing for me, and something that I just love opening my workshops with, and I'd love to open this one with as well. Come, let's fall in love again. Let's turn all the dirt of this world to shiny gold. Come, let's be a new spring, a love reborn. Find our aroma from the essence of all who emit heavenly fragrance. Like a fresh tree, bloom and spread all the blessings right from inside. Thank you, Rumi. Thank you, Nader, and thank you, everybody. This is also, I very uncharacteristically write notes, so I'm going to be timing myself and hopefully sticking to about the 1 hour mark. I'm going to be really going into a few things as in-depth as I can, but I do also recognize the fact that I have to rush over a lot of things that I would normally give quite a few hours to in normal circumstance. So yeah, ultimately the overarching themes of my lecture tonight and my presentation is self-empowerment. And I want everybody out there, I believe I'm speaking quite directly to an audience who are mainly architects. Architects, in my eyes, study incredibly hard and work incredibly hard, and I have a huge amount of respect for. That is something that I believe, to be able to go to uni, you need a lot of focus and drive for. So I have huge respect to all of you already. But I also want to let you know that anything that you want to learn, anything that you want to do in the world is completely up to you. And if you've got a passion to do it, you can do it. And that's reflected in my story and reflected in some things that I'll be sharing tonight. So the second overarching theme is the regeneration of self, because that's where absolutely everything starts. I think a lot of the issues that we have in the world today are because of the degradation of us knowing ourselves, really. And that goes out into all the work that we do. Whether that be designing, building buildings, how we build communities, how we build cities, how we approach people in work, how we approach people in our private lives, and really comes down to how we approach ourselves. So the regeneration of self, and thus the regeneration of communities, and thus the regeneration of the world through healthy, sustainable buildings and building practices and the processes that go into making them. So yeah. And the third overarching theme is beauty, creativity, and sacred connection. I do really speak a lot from a heart space in my life and in the way that I approach my work. And it may be a little bit confusing, how on earth does that have anything to do with building a building? But I believe it actually has absolutely everything to do with building anything in life and being creative. So you are all studying architecture and you are all listening to this lecture because hopefully you're interested in building buildings and doing drawings of buildings and plans of buildings. And so all of those things are done for a love of creativity. And I would like to remind everybody of your sacred connection to each other and why you're designing these buildings. I imagine you'll mainly be designing these buildings for people to be inside. So you need to remember and remind yourself of your sacred connection to other people and why you're designing these buildings. So to take the title apart a bit, Great, I'm really on time. To take the title apart a bit, there's kind of two sections to it. So taking sustainability into our own hands. So sustainability for me, it means in building, there's other terms, eco building or green building or natural building. These are all relatively the same blanket bubble term for me. In building, it means specifically for me, building with local, naturally occurring, abundant, or quickly and self replenishing materials with little to no processing for us to live a slower, smaller, and more connected and fulfilling life. So that was a bit of a mouthful, and so I'll go into it again. Sustainability to me means building with local, naturally occurring, abundant, or self-replenishing materials with little to no processing. That's ideal. Completely 100% ideal. There's purists out there who believe that's how you should be building a building. And that's very, very hard to achieve. It's not hard to achieve. It's just a certain vein of natural building. It's not something that I fall into. I am really trying to bridge, I and my company are trying to bridge the gap between the commercial industry, the current building industry, and bridging the gap towards the current building industry and natural building, which are two very different worlds. But when they're joined together and bridged, they actually can be incredibly powerful, more powerful than when they're apart, and incredibly beautiful, sustaining, healthy, nourishing, gorgeous, warm, love-filled environments to live in. So yeah, that is the ideal definition for me of what sustainability is, but there is no 100% in anything, and we must accept that there will be allowances made to that. And I'm not against that in any way. I know where cement needs to be used. I know where rubber, oil-based products need to be used, all these things. So the second part of the title is From the Earth for the Earth. So I threw that in there because specifically my building, SuperAdobe, is from the earth directly, quite literally. Earth or dirt, which we actually weren't allowed to say while I was studying. And every time we said it, we had to do 10 push-ups. So I actually hate using that word, but I'm using it so that everybody understands. Earth is the most abundant, infinitely recyclable resource, and it's indigenous to every single continent. And it doesn't matter on season, growing cycle, or anything like that. Yes, if you go to the other extreme of that and try and build every single building out of earth in the entire world, we'll have massive holes all over our earth. I totally understand that, but it is indigenous to every single continent. So that's why it's a great resource to be using. It's often free, and aside from transport and digging up costs, there's very little embodied energy in it. So that's my main breakdown of the title and sustainability for me, what it means, and I'm completely open to everybody else's definition of what sustainability is. And even if you're just as an architect, including 5% natural materials instead of 100% unnatural materials, even if you're just including 5%, that's still a win, and it's still a step towards a more sustainable future. So I'm not some of the buildings that I'll be sharing are, people have called them mud igloos, dirt igloos, mud huts. I do not in any way expect everybody in the Western or developed world to be living in mud huts. It's completely not achievable. And the thing that actually makes me most excited is blending the two worlds together. So my natural building intro is, I'll just quickly run over a few. I normally have about an hour or two to go into all these, so I won't go into them in depth, but my natural building intro is, I'll just run over a few of the main types and styles of natural building. So yeah, first one is rammed earth. I'll very briefly describe how they're made, but I can't go into it in much detail. The first one is rammed earth, which ultimately you get a box. You build a box out of formwork, which is often made out of plywood, supported with other timbers or steel, and you make an open box, so no top and no bottom. You put that open box on the ground where you want your wall to be. It must be the exact size of your wall. You then get a specific earth mixture that is quite often stabilized with cement or lime. You dump that into the box and you compress it either by hand if you're really roughing it, or more commonly in Australia at least, with a pneumatic rammer which runs on compressed air. So it's a big, like a jumping pogo stick, a big smashing hammer that compacts the whole thing. You then fill to the top of your box, and then you get another box and put it on top of that, and another box and another box. You build your wall up, and then at the end of the day, you strip all your forms off. That's rammed earth. There's straw bale, which uses bales of straw, square bales of straw, rectangular, sorry, and you build like bricks. So you lay them all next to each other, and then you render it with clay for internal rendering if you'd like, clay and sand mix, or lime and sand mix on the outside if it's against weather. There's two types of straw bale buildings: a load-bearing building, which means that it doesn't need any timber infill to hold the roof up, and then there's non-load-bearing, which is infill straw bale. So you build a timber-framed house and you'd fill in the gaps of all the walls with straw bales. So they're incredibly energy efficient, and that's straw bale building. There's cob, which is a mixture of clay, sand, and straw, mixed to a quite wet gelatinous mix that you then get handfuls of, and much like pottery, you build your entire home. That's very creative, very, very fun, and a very ancient technique. Mud brick uses this same mix or similar mix, depending where you are in the world, a similar mix of sand, clay, and straw, or some sort of fiber, but you throw it into a mold, which is a mold of a brick. You then slide it off, let it dry in the air, let it dry in the sun, and then you build a house out of it. Traditional timber framing is using not so much clear felled timber like pine, radiata pine, things like that. It's more traditionally, over the last 500 to 1,000 years plus, more artisan craftsmanship of using felled local trees. It's very popular in England, using oak, felled local trees, to be able to build the majority of your home out of timber, quite similar to log cabins, say, in Canada or other countries like that. So that's traditional timber framing. Bamboo, any tropical environment where you can grow bamboo, that's pretty self-explanatory, building with bamboo. Cordwood is rounds of timber, so short cuts of an entire tree, can be any diameter really. You get those cylinders of wood and lay them down, and then infill with cob or lime mixture around them, and that's they become bricks or building blocks or infill to they can also be load bearing, so you can put your roof straight on cordwood, or they can be infill to a timber frame house. That's cordwood. Earthbag building, which is what I specialize in. Earthbag building is getting polypropylene bags or sacks or Hessian bags, filling them with an earth mix from very locally on site, filling them with an earth mix, compressing them with a tamper, and they then become a compressed earth block, and then laying them like bricks and continuing on. You lay a string of barbed wire in the middle to be like mortar, and to help with seismic activity during a seismic event like an earthquake. So any movement, these strands of barbed wire give the whole building an element of tensile strength, and can give it a tiny bit of flex without it collapsing. So that's earthbag. There's hempcrete as well, which is the stalk of the hemp plant, not to be confused with the smokable marijuana plant. It's the hemp plant, which is a different non-psychoactive non-psychoactive plant. You chop it up into small pieces about 4 millimeters long. That's then dried, and it's full of pockets of air. You then dry mix that with a very dry mixture of lime, and you then put it into forms much like rammed earth. And then you pull the forms away, and the hempcrete stays in that form. Very insulative, fire retardant, rodent retardant, and pest retardant. So that one's a big buzz one at the moment that's getting a lot of popularity, which is great. Light earth, which is straw dipped in a clay slurry and then put into forms. The forms are taken away, and the clay slurry has acted like glue to stick all of the straw together. So that's a bridge between cob and straw bale. It's kind of a mix of two of those. And then reclaimed materials. It's not natural building as such, but I always incorporate reclaimed materials into all of my buildings. And that's a huge part of the sustainability movement, not necessarily the natural building movement. So the reclaimed materials is a really big part of it for me too. And I think they're incredibly beautiful, and they have a story. And I also throw tiny homes in there as well. That's a big movement that's happening at the moment. My umbrella for natural building really comes into my second definition of what sustainability is, and that's for all of us to live a slower, smaller, and more connected and fulfilling life. So tiny homes really let us do that. It's impossible to not be connected to the people you live inside a tiny house with, because they're so small. So it's really pulling away from materialistic, capitalistic desires to have a huge home. It's giving you less, and you make more out of those less things, and you have a more fulfilling life. So that's my very quick rundown of all the natural, or a few of the main natural building techniques. There are others, and I'd love to go into them more, but I cannot. First shameless plug for the evening. I have a YouTube channel. I have a 2-hour presentation of my normal presentation if anyone would like to watch it. I'll link all that at the end. So the next part is my story, how I came to this, and why I build like this. So very short version of my story is I had a really lovely childhood. I grew up in Melbourne, went to a great primary school, went to a great high school, had a really, really lovely time, and left high school and was ready to become an actor. And I then decided to have a gap year, and that somehow turned into 7 years. And towards the end of that time, life was getting a lot harder for me. I really was away from my passions, and away from my heart, and away from my creativity. During my high school years, I was so close and connected to that, but I hadn't studied anything since leaving. I'd done a very small stint at uni, and I did have creative pursuits and things that fulfilled me, but not that one guiding light that absolutely keeps you fulfilled and moving. So I had more than 10 years out of high school, and hadn't achieved what I wanted to. And my mum and dad knew, but we didn't really talk about it. They knew that I wasn't going well, and I had found SuperAdobe about 6 years earlier and started following it online. I also do audio engineering, and I've had a huge dream to make a solar-powered recording studio in the middle of the bush where artists can come, record an album, stay, I cook for them. We all live in an artistic community. They record great albums, and then they head back to the city. That's my main goal. And the reason I found SuperAdobe is because I was wondering how I'd build a timber frame house. So I just wrote into YouTube in about 2012, I wrote how to build a house, and one of the first videos that popped up was one from CalEarth, and it was SuperAdobe, and it immediately, I was about 20 seconds in, and I said, this is too cool and too beautiful. What is this? So I started researching it. I found CalEarth, which is the Californian Institute for Earth, Art and Architecture in California, and I started following them online. I found an Australian SuperAdobe page ran by an architect in Adelaide, and he then maybe 6 months, a year later, ran his first workshop teaching how to learn SuperAdobe. And it was the first workshop. It was a workshop to build the first legally permitted SuperAdobe structure in Australia. So this stuff is newer than new. It's really on the fringes, and it's very, very new. So I was really thankful to do that. I then did that workshop, and then a year later, my parents bought me a ticket because they knew I wasn't going anywhere in life, and sent me over to California. I did these 3 months, and I didn't want to be a teacher. I didn't even want to be a builder. I just wanted to learn for myself so I could run away to the bush and build these buildings. But I did the 3 months, and at the end of the 3 months, I couldn't not teach this stuff and share it with the world. So it transformed me, transformed my heart, and it transformed my entire life's purpose, ultimately. So I came back, ran a workshop 1 month later, and that was 7 years ago. And every year I've run multiple workshops and have built multiple projects, of which I'll go into 2 of the biggest ones at the end of this presentation. So yeah, that's my story in a reasonable nutshell. Nader Khalili is the inventor of SuperAdobe, and I'll very quickly touch on his story as well. His story, he was an architect in the US. He was Iranian born. He left when he was 18. The youngest child of, I think, 9 or 11, and the only one to leave Iran. He left for the US, got an apprenticeship to be an architect, which I don't believe you can do anymore. You guys can probably tell me better. But he got an apprenticeship, did that, ran a firm that built skyscrapers and huge multi-story underground and above ground car parks and huge buildings, all concrete. He then got very wealthy and very unwell. And so he sold his share in the firm, which was a multi-million-dollar huge firm in the US. He sold his share and went back to Iran, got a motorcycle, and drove throughout Iran and surrounding countries. And he studied the architecture of the place where he grew up, where his home is, literally, both spiritually and physically. And he realized that there was some major faults in the indigenous architecture, which was mud brick predominantly, but they'd taken it to such an amazing level. One of the largest indoor spaces in the world is a bazaar, so a massive market. I don't know the country, sorry, but it's all made with mud brick domes. So he studied the vault architecture, the power of arches, and the power of domes. And he came back to the US and wanted originally to actually fire homes. So he wanted to build a clay home and then shoot jet engines, ultimately, of huge burners, huge kilns, throw massive amounts of wood in there as well, and burn a house for 3 days until the entire mud brick home became one massive piece of pottery. That was his first idea, and he did that. He did it to 2 houses and 1 small community center over in Iran. And his memoirs are amazing to read. One of his memoirs is specifically about that project, and I really recommend reading that. So he came back to the US, and for pretty obvious reasons, that's not that reasonable to try and build like that. So he started mucking around with the same architecture, the same or similar techniques, but with some different materials. He first built a dome out of bricks that were donated. He got 50,000 free bricks from a place, a refractory firing place. So he got free bricks, and with his architecture students, he was still teaching architecture. He went out to Cal Earth in the middle of the high desert in California and started building these crazy buildings. It then moved into Earthbag Building, and he refined that technique and ultimately ended up patenting that technique, not for monetary reasons, but to actually stop anybody else getting it and monetizing it and making it illegal to build with that technology. So that's the only reason. He's never exercised that patent in any way. He got it to safeguard it from anybody else doing that. And his main mission was to house the world, both housing people in natural disaster situations, poor, untrained people, but then also he wanted to house all of the people who had monetary wealth, all the people in the Western world, in the developed countries. I don't like that term developed, but you know what I mean. In those countries, he wanted to also house those. So he wanted to create a technology that would span all of that and could be built incredibly simply and incredibly cheaply. And he definitely did that. So he wanted to tie in the 5 elements: earth, wind, water, fire, and the 5th element he called Rumi, which was a metaphor for the human spirit. And he believes no building or no action, nothing can be built without those 5 elements. And that is a huge guiding force for him, that Rumi element, and that idea of spirit and heart within the buildings that you build. It doesn't take long to look at the mosques over in the Middle East and the incredible architecture and devotion to that, to have a direct pointing towards the sacred, towards God, if you want to call it that, towards a higher power through their architecture. So yeah, that's his story in a nutshell, and I really suggest you read his memoirs. They're incredibly beautiful and really encouraging for architects like yourselves. So we're going pretty good for time. So I'll pull up a few photos, and everything going good technically, everything coming through, all good. Thumbs up, fantastic, all good. So the next section, yeah, I'll bring out how is SuperAdobe done. So my biggest passion and the thing that got me into this world is SuperAdobe. So to break that term up, Adobe is a title given to anything that is any form that is built of the earth. That's my interpretation. It also means earth, quite literally. But in this scenario, I really liken it to any form that's built of the earth. So super means advanced. It's also very cool and fun, but super means advanced, more strong, more robust, an evolution of some kind. So SuperAdobe means an evolution of some kind of traditional Adobe building. So Nader found out that in heavy rains and in earthquakes, the mud brick building of his homeland didn't survive. So he needed to build something that would raise the seismic strength of those buildings, or whatever buildings he ended up making, and be water resistant, much better water resistant. So I'll pull up my first picture thing. That all coming through good, guys? You got that? Fantastic. So the biggest thing that I want to teach, and is sometimes intimidating, especially to teach to a group of architecture students who I jealously know are very very organized, very deliberate, very particular, very by the book, for all good reasons. So talking about such a simple basic technology is sometimes a little bit intimidating. And I really would like to impress the ability for this to be modernized, and for it not to just be an emergency hurricane situation, or for poorer low income people. That's definitely not what I'm going for. But I do want to share and stress the simplicity of it. So the soil test is a jar test, where you put so you get to your build site where you want to build, and the best case scenario is for you to use the earth under your feet. Best case scenario. So you can go somewhere with a shovel and get all the materials that you're going to need to build a house. It's a lot of work, but you can do it. So you get a handful of soil from where you're going to be taking your soil from on site in Australia. And when I've done even my professional builds, it's hard calling myself a professional sometimes, but I have to get used to it. My professional builds, we have used the site cut. So the excavators come in to level the site and then to cut the foundations, and all of that soil often needs to be paid to be taken away. But instead, we use it and we build the walls out of it. So that's a huge, huge saving. To go back to my definition of sustainability, the local is really paramount in my mind. Local is at the top of it all. So you can't get much more local than under your feet or under the building that you're actually building. So you get a handful of that, you half fill a jar, and then you fill the rest with water and you shake it up and you let it settle. And you let it settle for as many days or hours as it needs until the water is completely clear. In the second photo here, it'll then separate into 3 to 4 really clear layers. The top layer is clay. The second layer is silt. The next layer is sand. And then the last layer is large gravels. So you must dig down past your black soil layer, which is topsoil. You must not have organic matter in it. So you can't build with what's in your veggie garden. You must dig down to your subsoil. And here in Victoria, we have a lot of clays, which is good and bad. Clay is kind of the magic binder that holds the whole natural building world together. So if you do have a lot of clay, that's great because it means you have a lot of the great sticky stuff that holds the natural building world together. But to build with 100% clay has its issues. I've done it in the past. But yeah, so you have those 3 distinct layers, and looking at that, the first jar shows it quite well. The more zoomed out view of the jar, that is that really clearly shows, and you can look at that, and without even marking it or measuring it, you can look and say that's pretty close to 95% sand, or around 90% sand and around 10% clay. You can clearly see that clay layer on top. It's a different color, and you also can't see the grains with your eyes. That's a big thing. I would love to go into this more, but that's ultimately how you do a jar test. And doing that mixed with picking up a bit, spitting on your hand and playing with it, those 2 tests will, to my trained eye, but also if I was to give you one workshop on how to do it, you would be able to do those 2 tests and be accurate within 5% of your soil type and consistency, which is amazingly empowering. Harking back to my first point, I want people to feel empowered. So yeah, if you've got a jar, water, and a handful for your soil, you can tell within 5% accuracy of what's in your soil. So that's really cool. So that tells you what needs to happen if you need to do anything. If you need to do anything to amend the soil, and it's not out of the question for you to bring soil in, but that soil can come from anywhere. We've gotten soil from graveyards because very regularly they're digging holes because they're putting things in them and they have to get rid of them. So we've gotten soil from graveyards, soil from pool companies, soil from other excavation building sites, from the building sites who just throw it away. So there's almost any number of ways to get free local soil if it's not perfect, if yours isn't perfect for you. So the next one is construction. This photo is a little bit smaller. I hope everyone can see it well. I've got some more close-up photos a bit later on. So the actual construction of SuperAdobe is actual construction of SuperAdobe is pretty straightforward. You get a long uncut bag, a long uncut tube of polypropylene bag, which will go into making rice sacks or grain sacks. These are also all over the world. That's what Nader wanted to focus on, making materials accessible. The small amount of materials that you need to buy, they must be accessible all over the world. One of the biggest exports of every single country, especially developing countries, is food and grain sacks. So there's going to be either used grain sacks available or new ones from the manufacturer. So you buy a long roll, which is the top left photo, a long roll. I get them on 300-meter rolls. It looks like a massive roll of toilet paper. And the bag sizes go in Australia, they go from 250 mil all the way up to about 800 mil in diameter as a flat, unfilled bag. You then get that bag, you measure the size that you want your wall to be, you get that bag, you bring it over, you scrunch it up to make it smaller, and then you start filling it with soil. That's the next photo of the lady in the sombrero and the lady in the red hat. You start filling it with soil that's from your site. The man in the red singlet is tamping it, which is a huge amount of the work. You smash it with a tamper and it loses about 2/3 of its, about half to 2/3 of its original height and becomes a compressed earth technology. It originally was called flexible form rammed earth, and it was then redubbed SuperAdobe when it needed rebranding, I guess. So it was flexible form rammed earth. So it engineering-wise reacts very similarly to like rammed earth, which is a pretty traditional natural building technique in Australia and around the world. So you smash it down. You then get barbed wire and you lace in barbed wire. That does two things. It holds the bags together, and it also gives the building tensile strength in a seismic activity, which is what the Adobe buildings in Iran Nader found didn't have. They had no seismic ability because they had no tensile strength. Earth technologies are great under compression, but they are useless in tensile or any twisting or movement of the building, like in an earthquake. The mortar lines and the bricks themselves will shatter and the buildings will fail without a doubt. So then there's a couple rows of SuperAdobe all stacked on top of each other, because you then just start the next bag straight on top and lay the next one. So it's very much like a 3D printer, and it goes and you 3D print a house. You also, in Australia, it's illegal to work without a scaffold, but places where it's not illegal, the wall becomes your scaffolding. You build on the wall and you quite easily and comfortably, not always comfortably, quite easily don't have anything next to you, and you continue to build on the wall and you come all the way up. So it's pretty wild. Foundations, again, I am breezing over this. I'd like to go into it more, but foundations, very simple. You just go 2 rows down, you waterproof it with a waterproofing layer. You can also not waterproof and fill your bags 100% with gravel. That's fine, and then come up out of the earth at least 1 to 2 rows of gravel before you start your normal bags. So if you want to use less plastic, which is the waterproofing, you can do the gravel technique. And the biggest project in Australia and close to one of the biggest SuperAdobe projects in the world, which is what I worked on, the Willow End Roundhouse, that had a SuperAdobe foundation. So it allows you to not have a cement-based foundation, which is a huge plus. And it also means that you don't have to change technologies to lay the foundation or pay another company to come and do your foundation. It's really tapping into that self-empowerment and empowering the owners or the builders. So that's a really, really great feature. So the next one is windows and doors. How do you make openings with SuperAdobe and Earthbag? You make a form first. You can either make it out of plywood and timbers, but if you don't, this is where you can get really creative. You can put a car tire in there, you can put half a barrel, and you can actually also make forms out of other earth bags that are filled with sand. So you actually don't need any other materials except the bags themselves. So to be able to build an entire home with including barbed wire and the bag, that's pretty amazing. They're the only 2 bought materials you need, aside from lime, to render it. Buttressing is a big, important factor. Buttressing helps to support the building because there's huge loads in these buildings. And buttressing is often perpendicular mass or perpendicular piece of SuperAdobe that comes out of the building that helps you apologize to the building, because you've done the unholy thing of cutting these sacred shapes. Often these are domes. and you've cut these sacred shapes, which a dome, a SuperAdobe dome, and the top of an egg are very similar in geometry. And the top of the egg is the universal thing that is the smallest amount of material and the greatest amount of strength. So you need to apologize to that, because you've disrupted that perfect sacred form, and you apologize with putting these arms coming out. And the ratio that I quickly teach people is whatever you cut out, you must double that. And imagine it's like a door that opens. So there's one, and then there's two, and here's your doorway. So you've apologized twice by doubling the amount you took away, and that keeps the form strong. It's little simple rules like that that I can teach in a few day class. And people can then leave and have left and built their own homes. So this is that real self-empowerment that I want to always come back to. Floors in natural buildings are often made out of earth. An earthen floor is very popular and very beautiful to live on and to make. And that's clay, sand, and straw. Again, that's a pretty golden mix that goes throughout a lot of different technologies in the natural building world. And that gets poured like concrete, troweled, left to dry, sometimes some small crack patching, and then that's it. But ultimately, any floor that you want, you can do. I won't go into that too much. These are some delicious plastering shots. You can get as creative as you want, and that's something that is really promoted a lot in SuperAdobe. And yeah, this is some finishing, some beautiful finished projects. This was my teacher at CalEarth's first project after he left CalEarth, and it's actually got a fourth dome that sits behind the main one that you can see. So it's 4 domes in Mexico on the beach. It's a beautiful beach house. So this is definitely a cement-based technology, but even just the pros of SuperAdobe being a technology that lets you make any shape you want and promotes you to think in curved ways. Even using cement, it's better in my mind than a square building made out of cement. So the pros, before I get through all of this, I'll just run through these, sorry. There's some more beautiful inspiration of SuperAdobe buildings, very quirky, very fun. And I want to say that this is not the only way, and not the way that I've built, and not the way that will always be built with SuperAdobe, but this is what originally got me. The top right photo here, the slightly sunken multi-dome space, that was a 4-bedroom family home near CalEarth, and that was made by one father and his one 12 and one 15-year-old children, and it cost him $60,000 US to make. So this is really accessible, cheap technology if you can build a lot of it yourself. So cool. I'll just pause there. This is my next project. I'll just pause there and quickly go through the pros and cons of SuperAdobe. So the pros, sorry, to get a little bit more into the specifics of it. The mixture, the ideal mixture to go in the bags of soil to sand to gravel to binder is somewhere similar to a concrete mix as well. If you were happy building with concrete, if you used a standard concrete mix, that would be ideal. That's the strongest. That's what you can do. But I don't use the term cement. I use the term binder. So the percentages of what's best is 70% sand, 20% gravel, and 10% binder. That is completely ideal. That's if you're buying stuff from a quarry or a sand and soil place. That's totally ideal. That binder can be cement, lime, or clay, or a mixture of all 3, or maybe just 2. So that's ideal. But I've built SuperAdobe buildings with site soil, which is 100% clay. So you can build, the beauty of SuperAdobe and Earthbag is the window is so large of what can go in the bags. So it's the most forgiving and the most encouraging to use almost whatever you find. We have also done builds using scoria or pumice stone. It's also called, which is an aerated volcanic rock, and that is highly insulative. Some of the best homes, including straw bale homes that I've been in, has been an insulated family home that was insulated that we built with 100% scoria in the bags. And you can also build load-bearing structures with 100% scoria in the bags. And that's really, really amazing. So the amount of stuff that you can put in the bags is very, very varied. The bag sizes, as I said, in Australia go from 250 mil all the way up to 800. Realistically, a human, even myself, who's been doing it for many years, the largest bag you're going to want to lay is around a 540 mil bag. Once that's flat, 540 mils, and then when it gets filled, it loses about 50 mil because it needs to get thicker and lose edge. So a 540 mil bag goes down to about 500 mil. And comfortably, if you're laying bags all day, which it takes ages, if you're laying bags all day, 540 mil bags is about as big as you want to go. A 450 mil and a 350 mil, they're ideal bag sizes. The photo which is up on the screen at the moment is actually a double-skinned building that we built with two 350 mil bags. So the 350 mil bags are like a walk in the park. They're so easy to lay, and 450s are good. They're solid, they're hard, but they're not out of control. So that's bag sizes. And although Nader Khalili invented SuperAdobe to be synonymous with domes and vaults, so a dome is ultimately an arch, and a lancet arch specifically, which you can build his SuperAdobe domes with 2 lengths of chain. So for a whole SuperAdobe build, to build the bag work as a dome, all you need is a roll of bag, a roll of barbed wire, a shovel, a tamp, and 2 lengths of chain. And that will build everything that you need to build a home that will withstand earthquakes, floods, fire, explosion, bullets, literally almost anything that you can throw at it. So that's why it's so empowering and so powerful. So yeah, but just because he invented it synonymously with domes and vaults doesn't mean that you need to stick to that. And the next house I show, and also this house on the screen at the moment, is not that at all. And a traditional roof, tin roof with LVL, standard timber, gutters, the normal stuff that would be on a normal Australian home, that is actually that bridge that I'm talking about that I'm most excited about, because that keeps the water away from the walls and keeps it just keeps things away from the walls ultimately. And that's really great. This one pictured is actually going to be completely waterproofed and completely covered. The roof is going to follow that that step down staircase look. The ceiling of this will follow that, and already there's the massive pole and the roof beams are in it. And this whole thing's going to get covered with earth. So you won't see any of this building except for the doors and the windows, which is pretty wild. So it's a huge gamut of not implications, ways that you can use SuperAdobe. So the pros are it's most strong when it's curved. So it makes you make circles, arches, curves. That's why I named my company Curvatecture, because it focuses on curves. So it makes you as architects, owner builders, as designers, it makes people think outside the straight line and outside the box, quite literally. So I think that that's really wonderful to be able to pull us back to these more natural shapes, more interesting, I think, shapes. There's nothing wrong with straight lines. There's a lot of beauty in them, but that more natural way of being and existing. So community building is a huge side of it. This must be done with either friends, family, or workshops, or you must have the money to be able to pay a staff. So the fact that most of these buildings get built with workshops and with friends is the most empowering part of it for me. And the thing that actually caught me really early on, yes, I was intellectually stimulated by this technology, but the community spirit and the reconnection with people, which I think we can all relate to right now all too well, this deep loss of deep connection through shared artistic and creative vision of us building something together, which is the way we have always built buildings for the entire time we've been humans, except for the last few hundred years where we began paying other people to build our homes. And the way that they got built was with the community, the people around you and your family. So that was one of the biggest things that I love about it. And something that has fed me and actually healed me in a huge way, and has healed immeasurable amounts of people that have come to my workshops and have come to other natural building workshops around the world. It's this same spirit that runs throughout them. Another pro of it is it's extremely strong. They almost broke they had to stop testing seismic tests for fear of breaking the earthquake machines at CalEarth. So the seismic level and the seismic rating of these buildings, specifically domes, is unknown because it's so high. So that's incredibly amazing that you could take soil from under your house, under your feet, and build something that's almost impenetrable. It's incredibly creative, and it's incredibly local, and it's incredibly simple. So they're the main pros of it. And the cons is that it's slow. It's incredibly slow to build. If you put it alongside bricklaying, traditional timber frame, as in current modern timber framing with carpenters and 90 by 45 timbers, nail guns, if you put it up against any of that, they will blow it away. They will laugh at you. But although that's a huge con, the pros are so strong in my mind, and there are ways around it anyway about how you structure your build. There's ways around that far outweigh that con of slow building. And a second one is hard to waterproof in humid and high rain areas if you choose to build a dome. The beauty of a dome is that the foundation, the walls, and the roof are all the same technology, all the same materials, and all the same technique. So that's why they're beautiful and incredibly powerful, but it's also their weakness. You need to have a perfect render, a perfect seal on it, otherwise it will leak. And that is the biggest downfall of them, and something I learned the incredible hard way, where I spent almost 2 years returning to a project of redoing free work while another massive project was happening. I was doing it on my weekends, and it almost killed me. So I know the fact that they can't be waterproofed easily, or at least my practices don't yet have a great way to waterproof domes. That's why I said traditional roofs are a really great way to go. So they're the main two cons in my mind. It's slow and they're hard to waterproof. So the specifications of it are like a little bit more technical. Most of it's built around arches. So doorways, door openings, it's all built off the geometry of arches. So you end up harnessing the ancient form of the arch to build your buildings, which is both beautiful and incredibly simple and incredibly strong. So that's how you make an opening in your building. And yeah, speaking on engineering here in Australia, I've found an engineer that has been willing to, and I've worked with an engineer on projects that gives me a cement-free foundation. Sorry, not cement-free, but an earthbag foundation. So the same technology, just a different mix with some cement in it. And then the rest of the house be unstabilized. So just stabilized with clay that was already in the soils. So to touch on engineering briefly, there's a lot of fears around engineering that natural buildings can't be engineered, or it might cost you $20,000, $30,000 to get the engineering. It's not true. In my experience, the engineering for that cost under $3,000, and we had all of those liberties that were so generous. So yeah, that's that. The foundations I touched on before, they can be earthbag foundations or gravel foundations, and I really push people to design without cement foundations. Cement foundations are great, and I actually really like working on them because they're so precise and strong, but that's something you may want to not work with. Domes, power of them, the roof and wall system are all the same technology. So people who want to self-build in a simple way, that's really empowering. electrical and plumbing is a huge question. One of the first questions I get from even people who aren't in the building industries in any way, just normal people. They just go, how do you get electricity and plumbing into it? And it's exactly the same way as you get into a normal house. You can lay a bag, you get up to whatever height you want, and you then lay a conduit for electrical or a water pipe on the bag, and then you lay another bag over the top and you continue building. So you need to be organized, but with pouring a cement slab, you need to be just as organized. So it's not asking any more of a builder trying to build in the Australian landscape. It's exactly the same. Once you're inside, it's clever to run your cabling within cabinetry if you can, but also the rows go up like this and they have a valley and a peak to them. So you can run your conduit in the peaks, in the valleys, running that way. And then you can also angle grind just big channels all the way down and put your conduit straight in there. So yes, there's some limiting things if you want to plaster over that. And if 20 years down the track, there's an issue with electrical, you may need to deplaster some, or if you're paranoid about it, you can just run clear access channels that are maybe a feature, they're timber lined, something like that, so that you can always access your electricals. That's why running them in a cabinet is a good idea. Waterproofing, I have had to use unnatural waterproof, so a bitumen-based thing. That's, something that I haven't been completely happy with, but also for all the pros that it brings, a very small amount of oil-based bitumen product, I'm not against in any way, and it ends up looking really beautiful. So that's waterproofing. Or you do a lime and sand plaster, which is very common in Australia, but and also with natural buildings, and traditionally a standard roof with large eaves, so you keep water away from your building. Lime renders can take direct rain, but it's always best to take care of them and shelter them as well as possible. So guttering, if you build a dome or a crazy vaulted building, you just build the gutters into the building. You sculpt them out of cement or whatever it is, and you then run them all off to another cistern that would need to be lower than the building, especially if your building's on a dome, your gutters on a dome are down low where they traditionally are. You got to run them away. But yeah, it's not terribly hard. So you can still get water catchment off domes. You can still do all that stuff that we really need in Australia, in the Australian landscape. So that's about, I could talk about the specifics of domes for hours. That's about it for the specifics of SuperAdobe, how you build the buildings, what they entail. And I'll now just quickly touch on two buildings. I got 55 minutes on my thing, so we've got 5 minutes left or so for me to just chat about two of my major projects that I've run as Curvatecture. The first one is this building that you're looking at now. Again, another shameless plug. I've got a YouTube channel and a quite active Facebook channel, of which all of these projects are really closely documented through just simple photos, but I've started making videos and stuff as well. This project was the first time I started doing video logs, which I'm really happy to be doing, where I talk about the ins and outs, and there's also a time lapse of this entire building being built. So I'd love for people to check that out. It's just Curvatecture on both YouTube and Facebook. So yeah, this building was called the Greenhouse at Narara. It was at an eco village. There is a Don't be distracted by the enormous, beautiful, architecturally impressive building to the right of it. Ours is the small one that's in the hole. So this one was a double story. It's kind of got a half mezzanine second story building, which is the first part in three sections of this house. It's the lowest section, so we started building it first. It was a massive site cut, of which we used 100% of that soil going into the bags, and then we bought in that site cut got us about 2/3 of the way through the build. We then bought another third of brought in material for very cheap, and it was local. So this is a double skin SuperAdobe on the outside, double skin of 350 mil bags, which fill to about 300 mil. So it's a 600 mil solid earth wall. And the whole thing will be covered. The reason we did double layer is because we wanted it to be incredibly strong. So this is what the house will end up looking like. And the lowest part of this building is the lowest part of this building is the sunken bit that we are working with. You can see that sweep up of the what will be the roof of the building, but looked like a spiral staircase spiraling down. You can see that quite clearly with the living roof on top. It's called a living roof when things are living on your roof. It's quite self-explanatory, but it's also quite a foreign concept to people, that you could build a roof, even a traditional timber roof, waterproof it like a kid's swimming pool, and put a lot of soil and growing medium and grow plants on your roof. So forgive me if I'm oversimplifying things and speaking to all of you amazing architecture students like you don't know anything. But yeah, that's what it ultimately is. And you can see the circular exposed Hobbit doors, which are featured there as well. The one front on it will be a large swinging circular door, much like the Lord of the Rings films. That was ultimately the motivation, to the inspiration to do it. So yeah, that's a sunken underground art studio, but ultimately a small not granny flat, like annex, maybe Airbnb, little friend studio, and then a central Earthship inspired greenhouse in the center, which is made out of light earth and some other natural materials. And then the very top one is a octagonal straw bale main space, which is kitchen, bedroom, where the woman will live. And this project is being undertaken by a 70-something-year-old British woman who lives on an eco-village called Narara Eco Village in just south of Sydney, near Gosford. So this is an incredibly ambitious project. It has SuperAdobe, cob, light earth, rammed earth, mud brick, straw bale. Yeah, so 6 natural building techniques all thrown in together. It's incredibly ambitious, and I was so glad to have worked on it. And my job was just to lay the bags, and then I got to leave. This is really me stepping into my professional life, and I'm really proud to say that somebody who has never been to university has now spent 7 years driving around the Australian bush with a bunch of hippie legends, gaining skills, and now building some of the most interesting homes in Australia. So this is the second SuperAdobe building in Australia to be permitted through council. The third. It's the second SuperAdobe building, but the third Earthbag building. This is the first one, which was my first major project and was the first SuperAdobe house in Australia to be built out of earthbags. It's called the Willow End Roundhouse, and I 100% encourage anyone who's interested to look on Instagram and Facebook at it. The owner builders, the woman in the relationship, is an amazing photographer, and her job was to take photos. My job was to build this crazy monstrosity, and hers was to take photos. She took the most beautiful photos of this entire house. So here we're about maybe close to halfway through the bags. I'll now give you a real slap in the face. This took us 9 months to lay all the bags for this, but I was the only paid person over those 9 months, and we had between 200 to 300 volunteers come through the whole house. So we worked on I've just hit the hour mark, so I'll wrap it up very soon, but we worked off a website called Workaway, which I highly recommend you looking into if you'd like experience in natural building, once we're allowed to travel again, of course. And we got almost 100% of our volunteer workers through that site. It's incredibly good and an incredible resource, and everyone turned up full of beans, full of energy, ready to connect with people, ready to share, ready to be in a community again. And we built a beautiful community, and it took us 9 months to lay the bags, split in half, and it was two sections of 4.5 months with a winter in the middle. So this project ultimately killed me. There's a little bit out of order. This is the top-down view, the floor plan, of this project. So I'll just quickly touch on that. This, you can see the mezzanine, upper mezzanine level, the bathroom, lounge, reading nook, which will ultimately become a large bed, and then the downstairs art studio with a fireplace and a small kitchenette. And then underneath the mezzanine level is large pantry and then deep storage as well. So the architect for this, who designed this, was also site manager. It's the first time I've worked under a site manager, which was really great. This project, the Willow End Roundhouse, was my first major project, and ultimately for all the bags, I was site manager. So it was crazy, ultimately. Yeah, it was very, very incredibly beautiful, incredibly challenging, and showed me a lot of ways that I could improve the way that I ran my business and the way that I asked for things in the world. And this is that Willow End Roundhouse from above. This is a drone shot of it. It's a great video on YouTube. If you search the Willow End Roundhouse from above, it'll show you this drone footage. So the two tiny dots in there, that's a scaffold lying down, the big box thing. The two tiny dots in there is myself and the drone pilot, and that center circle is a 10-meter courtyard, to give you a bit of reference. So from one point to the other was over 27 meters, I think. The largest straight walls, which you can see in here, the pink colored, or the light, yeah, the pinkish colored walls, are rammed earth. That was the first time I'd ever done rammed earth. And I was working alongside one person for 2 days who we hired the forms off, who had done it before, and the owner of the property. So myself and the owner and this dude, but then the dude left, and it took us 18 days to build the 4 large rammed earth walls, which you can see they're the 4 straight walls here from above. Yeah, we built those in 18 days. So you can see there the difference between an established technology that has been appropriately mechanized for Australian working conditions and working timelines and budgets, to be able to build those walls in 18 days, and then it takes 9 months to build the rest of them. It's pretty obvious to see there. So yeah, we've just hit an hour 5. That's my quick synopsis of it all, and I would just love to hear from you guys and love to just hear more. So go for it. Thank you so much for letting me talk.
Thanks so much, Hayden. It's been really good getting to sit here and listen and take notes and have a look at all your great pictures. We've got a couple of questions from the audience, so I think we'll start with those. There's one question from Eliza, who's asking, are there any issues with fireproofing the materials? And going on from that, just extending that a little bit, I wanted to ask about your processes building with a material that's not standardly used in the Australian industry or commonly used. I wanted to ask about just general compliance and meeting regulations and how you find that process, and just if you can elaborate on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the first questions, really. And there is a lot of, especially from the general public, which I believe is what's stopping a lot of this technology getting through. A lot of the general public are actually very afraid of that. They think that these things are incredibly difficult to get through. Thankfully for me, who has been obsessed with SuperAdobe for the best part of a decade, I have had the desire, and within my company, I have the desire to find a small group of engineers, and I work with a drafter. I don't actually work with an architect. She is absolutely wonderful. I work with a drafter. She specializes in bushfire proof buildings, and she goes to like the bushfire meetup every year of how to build better bushfire proof buildings. So the first part of that question, how do we fireproof them? The absolute best material against fire is earth. There's not much better, really. So ultimately, you're building with a material that, at the smallest, you never build a building that is less than, say, 300 mil bags. So you'd purchase the 350 mil bags, they'd go down to 300 mil. So your skin towards the outside of the earth is 300 mils of solid, heavily compacted earth. There is no way the earth can get through that. It's that simple. But in the Australian climate and the Australian building industry, if you were to build a standard roof on it, which I really do champion that idea and enjoy that idea, all of the standard regulations must be met. So the way that the bushfire rating board, or the people that you must submit your fire plan to, you run off the statistics and the data of rammed earth. So this is ultimately, as I said before, it's a flexible form rammed earth technology, and it ultimately performs with fire and under load in the same way that rammed earth does. So rammed earth is a lot more popular in WA, and it's quite popular on boutique builds. It's got quite a beautiful and warranted boutique air to it, and is often seamlessly linked with modern design, and I love that look. Absolutely love that look. So all of the data and work already out there specifically with fire is already out there and done. So you just pretty much tick the box that it's rammed earth. But then more traditionally with all the other regulations and things like that, the Roundhouse, they were owner builders, and their submission to get their house through took like the best part of maybe a year and a half or more to get it through, which is really, really long. But they did not care in any way. They did not even question what the walls were made out of. The reason it was so hard was for a lot of very arbitrary reasons. Really arbitrary, completely unrelated to what the walls were made out of. The reason that is because in Victoria, at least, as long as you get the all clear from an engineer, which, as I said, I've put in the work to meeting and finding. It did take a while for me to find someone, not even just someone who was like, oh yeah, I'll give that a shot, but I'll over-engineer the shit out of it. It's like, yes, I will give it a shot, and I'll actually give it the confidence that it deserves. I found someone who works just in Victoria who is absolutely amazing. And he, as I said, it was about his engineering notes was about 3 A4 scribbles. It was like doctor's writing. It was almost hard for me to read, and I was the one, building the building. 3 pages of some scribbles, a few, it looks like maths homework, and then just a thumbs up at the end, and that got submitted with the plans. And because he takes on the he and his business take on the liability for that, because he said that it's going to be okay as long as we follow. That's a lie. We had 3 drawn up CAD plans within our plan submission. We had 3 engineering specifications of above windows, above doors, and foundation specifications. As long as we followed those, then he was willing to stamp his name to it. And they were very simple to follow. It wasn't overly engineered. The engineer for the second house that I showed you, so the Willow End Round house I built first, which was end of 2016 to the end of 2018. And then Narara, that was just at the beginning of this year. The engineer for that originally had a ludicrous thing that she wanted us to do. She wanted us to ultimately build back into the wall, back into the earth, about 8 rows, and then come up like a massive staircase all the way to the top of this like 7 meter wall. So it would have been more bags in the supporting bit than were in the actual building. So she asked that of us originally, and from the get-go I said there is no way we are doing that. So that's kind of where it comes into doing a bit of your homework and not just going with the first architect, the first engineer that says, yep, we're sweet. Do this. A couple over in WA, which built the first Earthbag dome house. So Earthbag Building is using single grain sacks, not the long tubes. So you get often old recycled grain sacks, or you buy new ones. They're still pretty cheap, and you build them like bricks. So you fill one of those, fold it, lay it down, and smash it, and that becomes one brick, and that stays right there on the wall. And then you fill the next one. It's easier to do with less people, and it sometimes moves faster. They built the first single Earthbag dome house in Australia. They're over in WA, and they said that their engineering cost somewhere between $20,000 to $30,000, which I could not believe because all the engineering I've done has been under $3,000 for even the Willow End Roundhouse, which is, you know, gigantic and crazy. So yeah, that's how we approach the permits, and specifically fire. There's no way you can burn down an earthen house. You can only burn down the roof if you choose to do that. So I'd suggest building a steel roof, a thick steel roof, and just doing all of the normal BAL 40 or fire zone information, which is already out there, which really pertains a lot more to eaves, openings of doors, windows, things like that, and the shrubbery around your house, the landscape of your house, not specifically, you know, the least thing you have to worry about would be the SuperAdobe. So yeah, hope that answers it.
Cool. Okay. So Hayden, we've got another question here from Gia. They're wondering, can you fill the bags with things other than soils, e.g. plastics or construction waste, as long as it's compressed?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot, and that's a really great question. What I would do personally, and what I think is an absolutely great idea, if you're willing to look into the off-gassing issue, which would be pretty minimal, I've thought to have a plastic shredder on site that would be able to travel around with my company and shred all site waste through that, and then you get a granulated plastic. Ultimately, it'd be hard to shred things like bags and stuff like that. They get stuck in the machines, but you'd find a way. You'd shred it down to these pellet forms, and then I'd add like between 1 to 5% of that to my bags. So 95 to 99% soil mix, and then I'd throw in those leftover bits, and that would mean that all waste that's produced on site could then hopefully be reused. And I got in a lovely man pointed out to me how unsustainable SuperAdobe is because it uses so much plastic. But I'm really happy to step into that world where you embrace the unnatural world that we live in right now and try and find a solution for it instead of just trying to ignore it completely. And I think that's actually a really great thing. So it would need to be compressible plastics, so like a bottle shredded up, or anything like that, any hard plastics that are shredded. I would love to see that happen. And you could realistically go to 20%. That could become quite a large part of your mix if you have the other elements, sand, gravel, clay, or binder. If you have them in the right mixes, definitely. It would get to a point where you'd have too much in there and it would probably become a hindrance. But yeah, I think it's a really good idea. And also, you always have leftover bags. So at the end of a build, you have a big bag full of bags because you've accidentally cut them too long, because you often measure them with your feet. You walk foot by foot, like heel to toe, and you count out your feet, and then you go and cut that on the ground. It's very much using your biology as the technology. So you always have a bag full of bags, and they're a woven polypropylene mesh, which you can cut into really small. You can get a team of people just cutting for a few hours to cut up all of the little fibers, and then those fibers can go into your early levels of plaster to become your fiber element, which a clay-based renders, even cement-based renders, deliberately put in these plastic fibers. You can buy them to put in. So yeah, you can easily reuse it in that way as well. My only thought to that is off-gassing, which I know nothing about. So I'd probably keep it on the outside of your building if you were doing that, and potentially not the inside. Because you're covering up the SuperAdobe bags, which are polypropylene, with clay, that clay becomes a very dense filter for any off-gassing to have to come through. And any toxins within the air, I believe, would get trapped to the carbon and trapped to the clay particles, something along those lines. That's a bit made up there, but I would believe that would be relatively true. Awesome question.
We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm loving these super.
Like I said, I'm happy to talk for as long as you want. It's
great.
Yeah,
I would also love to go all night, but what I'm gonna we'll shoot a bunch of questions at you. We can get some quick fire responses.
For sure.
Good ones. I've got one here from Mitchell. He says, Hi Hayden, thanks for your lecture and the time. I was wondering how you imagine this being used within an urban context, such as within Melbourne's inner suburbs for the likes of terrace housing or apartments. Is something like this feasible or even a replacement for the likes of concrete? Have you had any experience with this, or are you willing to attempt it in a city?
The first workshop that I went to was in a residential backyard in Adelaide. That was the first time I got to touch SuperAdobe, and that was the first legally permitted building in Australia. It was in just a very typical tiny backyard of a small piece of land. It would have been a quarter acre, if that. Yeah, so it immediately goes in. And what I would definitely say in that setting, stick to straight walls, do maybe very subtle curved walls, do a traditional roof, and do a very clean, modern-looking, sharp render. Because then ultimately it will look like a very interesting curved brick building or something like that. And the best thing that we can do, yes, I showed you guys a lot of photos then of pretty crazy looking domes and stuff like that. And I find that really interesting and fun. But the most important thing is that we can convince the conventional seeing people to be able to take this on. So the biggest inhibiting factor at the moment for it being taken on by traditional technologies, traditional builders and things like that, is the speed of it. It's incredibly slow. So I'm working at the moment at 2 machines to make it faster. One is a render sprayer, which will spray the render on because that takes a long time. And the second is those machines already exist. But the second is a soil mover, which is ultimately a really large conveyor belt with a big hose coming off the end that you can move the hose around your site and shoot it into the bags. That's my biggest advancement that I plan to build. And that I think would be a way to really speed things up. And also jackhammer instead of hand tamping, which is tiring and time consuming. So a big jackhammer with a massive tamp on it. It'll never take over these technologies, but it'll hopefully get in there eventually. At least a couple houses, that's all we want.
Great. Okay. So another question from Pat. Is it possible to have an earth bag foundation for a straw bale house to avoid using